Hello, I'm Alex, and I'm glad to welcome you to another episode of our series Drivers of Innovation by Naumann Foundation here in Hong Kong.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Karena, Belin. I'm the co-founder of WHub. We're Hong Kong's community builder and power connector, and we love to support startups and help them scale by connecting them to the resources they need.
Thank you for joining us today. Let us just dive into it right away. So why Hong Kong? What made you choose this place to work here? If I'm well informed, you also lived in other parts of Asia.
I did. So actually, what brought me here to Hong Kong was not my entrepreneurial journey. And one of the things I say is very characteristic about Hong Kong is if you don't start a business here in Hong Kong, you probably don't do it anywhere else in the world. So Hong Kong is by nature and historically a very entrepreneurial place. So this is how I started here, and I think the story of a lot of founders is they've already been in Hong Kong and they're just leveraging the opportunities of Hong Kong to launch their business.
When I speak to people, they say like it's either you stay here for 2 years or you stay for 10. So you are already 6 years in, so I'm sure you will like complete the 10-year journey, if not even longer. So why is that? What is the fascination with the place that some say, okay, 2 years are enough, and others say like, oh no, I'm staying here quite much more longer?
Yeah, I think there are different aspects to it. One obviously is a cultural aspect. So if you enjoy staying in Asia and being exposed to that cultural diversity, I think you really then have the best starting point to stay here for a longer period. The second thing then, and I have been in other parts in Asia, be it in Japan, in Southeast Asia, what Hong Kong really offers is that typical East meets West, the melting pot, comparable to Singapore, and very often both get compared and are in a healthy competition. But I think what you can do as a foreigner, you can do business in an Asian context. The business language is English. The opportunities and also the infrastructure is very similar to what we're used to, be it rule of law, be it the supporting infrastructure also from the government. It is really a place that is prone for locals and foreigners together, build businesses.
Is this uniqueness not somewhat challenged nowadays, even within China, creating competition within the country? Like Shanghai is mentioned very often to become like a new hub. Shenzhen is another hub. So how does Hong Kong keep up with all these new centers coming up?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, obviously Hong Kong is always and has always been in healthy competition, looking at Singapore because it's very similar in terms of opening or having that openness to the West, but at the same time being able to, launch into the Asian culture and Asian markets. What is for Hong Kong, I think very particular, it is always been geographically very centrally and strategically well positioned. It's a little bit the hourglass, right? You have China on the top and you have Southeast Asia on the bottom. You're in a 4-hour radius of half of the world's population. In terms of supply and access to resources, you're sitting next to the Pearl River Delta, the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. So I think actually the thing is, it's not Hong Kong or Singapore or Shenzhen or Shanghai. I think it's and I think that's the opportunity that Hong Kong can provide. One more thing I would add is what is very hot and vividly discussed is the Greater Bay Area, which I think by now is not exactly the politically correct translation from Chinese, but it's basically this area of Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Macau, and other 8 cities here in the Guangdong area. And if you compare it, if you think about the US and you think about Silicon Valley, you think about Las Vegas, you think about New York, if you can put that, here all together in a small radius, that's what you have with Macau, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong. That's exactly what's happening. And I think that will be moving forward the additional, strategic advantage of Hong Kong.
And it seems still like to be this sort of advantage. You had not only influx in the last years from the mainland, people coming in from the mainland, but also from Europe, from France, as we know. So this, I guess, this influx of new people will, I guess, pose a lot of challenges for the city, which is quite confined in its territory. And I guess many of the startups and new businesses may revolve around that: how to live in a city, how to live sustainably in a city. What about water consumption? What about public transfer? Am I right in my assessment? assumption here?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, I mean, Hong Kong actually is not that small, right? I mean, with the new territories in terms of land, right? Of course, in terms of housing and land that is currently now really exploitable in terms of business and living, it is dense. And with you're referring to some of, obviously, the challenges that cities meet. That's one of the reasons why smart city is a focus area, you know, when we go into different industries and verticals, where the government is also putting a focus on. Yes, I mean, are the landfills full in Hong Kong? They are, right? So what are all these challenges and how to overcome them? And that's where also the government is really banging or hoping on technology and startups making a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like theory, political theory, if you will, saying like the you know, like power in the future will revolve around big cities, because basically if you take the GDP of Shanghai and LA like together, that's just like more than like half of the smaller countries in Europe. So basically this is something that Hong Kong can exploit, this like new trend towards like metropolises and living in the city.
Yeah, and again, I think it's actually looking into this entire region in a little bit even broader scale. So you mentioned about Shenzhen. I mean, Shenzhen is very, it's amazing. Already Hong Kong, we say, is one of the fastest growing ecosystems in the world because it is and was small, but also because, again, the pace of change is enormous. Infrastructure-wise, you have everything you need. You just need people to shift the focus. You already have over 300,000 SMEs. You know, all the backbone is there. When the investment pours and the talent comes, you know, things will explode. What is happening in Shenzhen, it's even crazier. The pace of things and also the resources available, the support from the government over there is amazing. So the tech talent that is drawn, and you know, thanks to Tencent, you have a little bit that phenomena, what happened in Silicon Valley, people made money through tech and reinvesting that back into tech. That will definitely have an impact here also to Hong Kong. So again, I think it's interesting because at the same time it's dense, it's hyper connected, but it has this openness and it has this connection and door into China via Shenzhen.
And how's the revolving door like outside China? Like, because you mentioned the success in Shenzhen, and then you would be looking into the success of the web, if you will, and you would be like, if you're an enthusiast, a technology enthusiast in Europe, you would always emphasize on the fact that it's open. We also know that that Apple is not an open system, but Google is, in fact. So even in the Western world, there exist several models. But like in terms of economy in general in China, it seems like influx no problem, outflux a problem. How do you see that in the tech sector?
Right. I mean, first of all, even again in terms of outflux or you know, inbound and outbound into China, that's always one of the questions. I think that's again where Hong Kong can play a major role, not only inbound into China and helping, you know, to transition over for Western companies to get into the Chinese market, but also outbound. So we have enough examples of startups from Shenzhen or from China setting up also an office here in Hong Kong, because to communicate with the rest of the world, right? Just if you want to leverage Google, you mentioned Google Drive, etc. I mean, you don't have access, right, in China. You just cross the border, and even when I'm in Shenzhen, you know, I do not necessarily have access to Facebook. I do not have access, you know, to my G Drive, and communicating with the team makes it more difficult. So there is this possibility that Hong Kong provide also for Chinese company as a first move outside of the country. Now, I'm not sure if you were referring to the whole point about data protection, and I mean, that's typically very often, you mentioned different models where it becomes a little bit philosophical or ethical in terms of, what is the right approach? And of course, one of the advantages in China is the fact that access to data is easier for startups as long as there, is a strong collaboration with the government.
It's like, this is, I also refer to it like in terms of scalability on the sheer business philosophy, if you will, that now you have like Alibaba and other like outlets from China who, even though this is such a big market of 1.5 billion people, still try to reach out to other markets just because that's like the intrinsic mechanism of business making. Whereas this is the same like also like intrinsically in Apple, Google and what other companies you may name, but there seems to be like not equal terms on doing that, and I'm just wondering, not to become too political, but just like staying on this economical paradigm, if you will, if this can last forever, or if there's just like the tech sector can provide indeed like some slight changes in exchange of information and also like scalability of business models.
Right. Again, I think when you come from the pure tech sector and you take away any political filters or so, I think that's actually by definition, right? Startups are meant to go global, right? And of course, when you're in the US or in China, your local domestic market can be big enough for a long time. But then there is, beyond the sheer market size, I think there is this urge of providing the better solution and having the cutting edge technology. So that per nature then, requires or even incentivizes startups to go abroad. I mean, US startups to get into China and vice versa. And
sure.
In particular, I mean, even in areas like, be it AI, I think things that we can see happening in China are going, again, very fast and are very exciting, and people already say that there are things happening that probably really put the US in the second position or way behind. So I think, again, from a pure tech perspective, what I would argue is I think you rather have the focus on the opportunities it provides to go abroad rather than from a pure market perspective or market size perspective.
Yeah,
but I think Hong Kong has the right mixture actually exactly with that.
It's like if you have investments, if you bring investments into a region or a country, you want to be be secure and certain your money is used for what you want it to.
Exactly. Yeah. Structures, I mean, when it comes to fintech, be it KYC rules, AML rules, anti-money laundering or know your customer rules, I mean, it really also helps create structures that are sustainable because they won't go bust overnight because it was bad money or dirty money or any touchy things that you were involved in.